Good evening. What is Sasquatch? That's the big question. Many people, probably in the millions by now, all across North America, into Canada, even parts of Mexico, all across the world through Europe, China, all through Asia. Many people all across the world see a large hominid creature like you see in the excellent Patterson-Gimlin film here. You also see it stabilized by M.K. Davis. It's one of the best versions, one of my favorites. But anyway, the subject you see is not unlike what millions of people across the world have seen. And Native Americans throughout history and natives from other regions from around the planet have reported for thousands of years. Large, hairy, bipedal. You hear a lot of wild men, ape men, a wild tribe, the hairy man. You hear a lot of descriptors, and a lot of times man comes into effect. And it wasn't until recently that we, last couple hundred years, that the Western world was really aware of the great ape species, that we started to compare them to gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans. And they certainly do bear a resemblance, because the great ape species, if you go by science, by the way, today we're going to be talking about science, modern science as you know it. Now, I know a lot of our viewers are tuned up and turned on to things that aren't our modern science that you find in history books. I'm one of those people as well. But for the vast majority of people out there, the people who maybe aren't Bigfoot researchers, the people who are just saw one run across the road or had a strange experience in the woods, or a family member told them about a Bigfoot story, it's really important that we talk in modern science type lingo and take a look at conventional thinking. Now, I'm going to do a whole nother video where we deal with creation, whether it be at God's hand or genetic manipulation. But right now, we're going to talk about the standard evolution models. I think a good constructive person can have two mindsets and kind of combine them over. So today we're primarily going to talk about Sasquatch and how they pertain to science. And it's really quite obvious to me that when you look at the great apes, here we have the four types going by. The first one looking very much like the patty type, a type 1, a type 2, which has a little more of a snout, like a chimpanzee, smaller, still very excitable. These are the ones found all throughout the South. Very rare regions between the Missouri and Mississippi area going on up to Canada. People report, believe it or not, a Bigfoot creature, very aggressive, with a snout like a baboon, and then other ones that look more human. And those are kind of the four basic types. And when we look back through our own fossil records, through our own family tree as human beings, from Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus, which was quite a bit bigger than his predecessors, and then Homo neanderthalis, that one thing you got to understand about Neanderthal skeletons is they're very robust, and these were very robust people or creatures or whatever you want to call them now, where I think it's kind of up to you, to the individual, where human starts and human stops. But then you have modern Homo sapiens at the end. And this is a small sample of our fossil record of Homo, which is kind of surprising, because it seems like every few years there's another great discovery in our fossil record. Whether it's, 10, 15 years ago when they discovered the Homo florensis, the little hobbit people, the little 3 or 4 foot tall people they found in Indonesia, all the way up to the most recent discovery a few years ago. Not quite Neanderthal, not quite humans, but the Denisovans. I always have a hard time pronouncing that. And then not pictured on that chart was also the Homo heidelbergensis. And heidelbergensis was like a modern human, but like naturally stacked, a very big bone structure. You could see the spots on the bone structure for very large tendons. These were the professional athletes, the Olympians, the football players of the natural world. And you can imagine those guys running around all day, chasing around things, living on an all-meat diet, how buff and strong those things were. And the reason why our family tree is important is because we can't say equivocally, from what we know, but Sasquatch is definitely somewhere in the great ape species. It seems to be, it has a lot of the same characteristics. And what you see here is a gargantuan picture of a Gigantopithecus, which was, they don't know, they have some skull and some teeth samples of this creature, but they know it's part of the great ape species. Now, there's a lot of debate whether it was quadruped like a gorilla or biped. But if it was biped, it would be 7, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, not unlike a modern day Sasquatch. In fact, there's even some debate or rumor that what they discovered in the Gigantopithecus could have been some kind of an ancient Sasquatch. We just don't know. We don't have enough of the skeleton, but it definitely looked like it ate maybe possibly some meat, possibly vegetables, just from the dentition that we found. And if you see this recreation of a Gigantopithecus, it's quite striking because this is very close to what a lot of people describe in the anecdotal evidence for Sasquatch. And there are some researchers, like I said, there's no right or wrong theory, there's no bad answers, think that maybe it's a relic population of Gigantopithecus. And that's kind of one of the theories for what we think is of Sasquatch. Now, when we get into collecting one for science or identifying one, most type specimens of all the creatures that we have today on display, current or extinct, were shot or killed or trapped in some kind of a way. And if Sasquatch is human, they seem to be very human-like in their vocalizations, their personalities, the way they interact with their environment, the way they manipulate things, the way they appear, they walk upright. And, it seems to be that they seem to be very human. So one of the big things in the Sasquatch field is it ethical to shoot one? Well, if you look at the term homicide, that comes from Homo, which is the genus, and sapiens, which is our species. So technically, being the only living members recognized by science, living of the genus Homo, like I think technically if you found a Neanderthal somewhere that was still alive and you killed him, you could probably go to jail for homicide. And when you look at whether or not that's ethical or not, we also have to think about, do these things think, do these things feel? And more than likely, yes. There's been a lot of great ape studies, especially with chimpanzees and gorillas, exactly how smart they are, from learning sign language to problem-solving intelligence. So the ethical reason to take one for science is really a very personal question, I think. And there's also the Undiscovered Species Act in North America, where you can be fined for shooting an undiscovered species. And it's generally a road that I don't really want people to go down. I think maybe if we find a sick one or a dead one or roadkill, that would be great. Terrible for the individual, but great for modern science. So besides the Patterson-Gimlin film, Ron Morehead, I'm going to go see him talk here in a few weeks at the MUFON event. That's besides the point. I love his work. He is the purveyor of the Sierra Sounds, which was done deep in the middle of the Sierras in the 70s. He got on recording interactions with creatures, and they were Sasquatches, and I 100% believe him. And what's great about his recordings, I beg you guys to go take a look at it. If you guys are hardcore Sasquatch people, you already know. His stuff has been analyzed by linguistic experts, people who work for the military, spies, PhD type doctorate people who look at language and how people speak and all the different types and the hallmarks of it. And his Sierra Sounds has been analyzed to show that there is actual language there, not just sounds and communication that animals do, but actual language with beginning and end sentences and structures and repeated verbs and repeated language in there. And that's very fascinating, and that's one of the reasons why I think that they are very close to humans. And I beg you guys to go check it out. One of the other things that's very controversial is DNA evidence. Now, Melba Ketchum, in conjunction with a few other people, did a DNA study, and she said that the DNA genome was half human and half something else undiscovered. Now, other people have interpreted this biblically as to be the Nephilim or something like that. But you could also, extrapolate that as if, you want to go completely scientific, is that it's some other species, or maybe this exact Bigfoot that they got the DNA from is a crossbreed. Maybe it had a human mother or a human father, and the other thing was a Sasquatch, and we're so close in genetic material that we can actually interbreed, just like coyotes and wolves do sometimes, just like domestic dogs do sometimes, and actually to the point of having viable offspring. Even polar bears and grizzly bears crossbreed. So that's been, one interpretation is that people want to give it some kind of supernatural attribute to the other half. Now, also, by the way, before anybody points it out in the comments, yes, I do know Melba Ketchum has a very, some people love her, some people hate her, some people think she's crazy, some people think she's right on, some people think she didn't get her due justice, some people think her scientific paper was written very poorly, other people think it was great. I encourage you guys to go form your own opinion on it. I do think that even if you disagree with it, it's still very fascinating to think that someone's going in this direction for the DNA genome study for a Sasquatch. Now, one of the other bits of evidence that's fascinating is the physical evidence. Now, we're talking footprints, hair samples, when it comes to proof of Sasquatch. And a lot of times in North America, by the way, I did a whole video on when you're collecting possible hair evidence, you want to wear sterile gloves, use sterile tweezers, and pick it up and put it in an envelope, not plastic. Plastic can degrade the hair sample. But one of the things that's very common is people pick up a hair sample off of a tree or a barbed wire fence and they send it in, and it comes in as unidentified. And you got to remember, when you send it to a lab or a research area that would identify these things, they look at bear, deer, cows, elk, whatever's in there, and if it doesn't match that, of course it's going to come back as unknown, because the labs in America don't have Sasquatch hair. And then sometimes it comes back as human hair, which, like as we discussed, is very probable if these things are part human, or in fact very close to human, if not human, depending on what your definition of it is. The other thing that a lot of scientific work that has come about, and if you're into the nuts and bolts and physicality of Sasquatch, are the footprints. And then you look at, the Yeti and across the world, and they're all kind of, some of them have more of a divergent toe, which may be more of a primitive, and some of the Sasquatch have more of a modern human type look to them. Generally, they're very big, very deep, which goes to the size of these creatures. And if you upscale the human, you start to get problems when you start getting into 500-600 pounds and athletic and being able to run and move efficiently. So you need to go to a larger, flatter foot where more of your weight comes in contact with the ground. The bone position, possibly, if you follow the work of a lot of people who analyze footprints, their ankle bones and their leg bones are a little more centered on the foot, and their midfoot has a lot more flexibility to it. It's not as rigid or high arched as humans, and this gives them a lot more traction, the ability to run, the ability to put that weight down and pad their feet. And that's how they got their name. The common name Bigfoot is they found these Bigfoot tracks. And a really good scientist, somebody who's studied anatomy, who's done it for many years, can extrapolate quite a lot from footprints, like Dr. Bendernagel and Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and even other researchers who don't have the biggest scientific background, like Cliff Brockman, and some of the, there's a bunch of them out there. You can really extrapolate a lot. And, before people say it, there are fakes. One of the most common ways to spot a fake footprint is if the toes are dug in more than the other ones, because when you have a rigid surface like a board strapped to your foot, you're going to push off, and it's going to make the toes dig in more. So when it comes to photo evidence, the things that we should be looking at, 3 of my favorites are the Myakka skunk ape photos you see on the left. Very interesting story of a lady in Florida who had this thing in her backyard. And if you see the whole photos, I've done multiple videos on it. I believe Bigfoot Tony, Thinker Thunker, Bob Gimlin, all the great guys on YouTube who I feel do better work than me have all done breakdowns of it. Of course, the iconic Patterson-Gimlin film that you see there in the front. And there are many great works on the internet. Kind of debunking the hoax theory when you get into the whole story. I've met Bob Giblin. He seems like a genuine guy. No, I'm not going to get into the Bluff Creek conspiracy, although I do think that's fascinating. And I believe that it really could be possible, a lot of the stuff that's laid out in that alternative timeline. Whether you believe the Bluff Creek conspiracy or not, or have any idea what I'm talking about, the subject on the Patterson-Gimlin film, I was 100% convinced, is a real female Sasquatch. And then finally on the right, you have the Freeman video, which is also very, very good. And there's a number of other ones on the internet. Now, in order to have full scientific discovery, you need to have good scientific researchers, full-on professors, PhD doctorate, people who have devoted their life to science, people who have a career of it. And I guess, the definition of a career is something that you would do even if you weren't getting paid. And these guys really fit the bill. Dr. Meldrum, Dr. Bendernagel, who passed away a couple years back now. There are a number, although very few, of actual learned people who take an interest in Sasquatch. And I think it's quite fascinating that in the United States, when I talk to PhD wildlife people, like people I have in my family and other researchers and people who work with animals and environmental stuff, they all blow off Sasquatch. But I talk to people outside of the United States in the scientific realm, and they seem very intrigued by it. I think there's to no fault of their own, they're very scientific. They live in a world of concrete answers and proof and objectiveness. So something a little bit more abstract, like a mysterious ape, and then not to mention, they have a different form of common sense that says that, well, we would have found it by now. Science trumps all, or until I see it in front of me, it's just folklore. And I think us as lay people are actually gifted in the fact that we can extrapolate a little bit better, form our own opinions, especially for ones of us that have actually seen them up close and had encounters with them. We can tell science to kiss our ass, because I've seen an 8-9 foot tall hairy ape man staring me down or looking in my window. And the other piece of this that I have to mention here is, on really good footage, or why don't we have a body, or why isn't this out there, is there seems to be an active cover up. Now, some people say it's the government, some people say it's lobbyists and insiders from the logging industry, some people say it's independent organizations or a worldwide organization. And the question is, why would they want to cover it up? Well, some of the things are, I think that on the surface level, Sasquatch, I feel, do occasionally take people for whatever purposes, who knows, and I think the government might be liable for that. And also, if there was a possibly endangered, undiscovered species of humans or apes in the woods, they would have to set aside huge lands for protection. And the logging industry, the tourist industry, the camping, outdoors industry, which is multi-billion dollars, hunting industry, all that would go by the wayside. And then there's a more sinister talks of that maybe there's something else to these creatures that maybe buck modern science, or would be a conjecture to some of the evolution theories, and that's the real reason for the cover-up. I don't know. And so that's just kind of my take on some of the scientific origins of Sasquatch. If you want to look at it objectively, they appear to be, and from what everybody studied, some kind of an offshoot of the great ape species, more specifically in the Homo genus, related to human beings very closely. And when you look at some of the descriptions, some look like a chimpanzee, some look like a gorilla. And you look at historical, where they all call him hairy man, it seems pretty obvious to me that they are very close to human beings, but maybe not exactly us. So that's the video I wanted to make, talking about the scientific origins of Sasquatch. And thank you very much. If you like this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe. And it really helps us out. And stay safe in the woods, folks.